The conference room on Meridian Point Station felt cold, despite the environmental controls set to accommodate multiple species. Princess Zarathi of the Krell Empire stood near the viewing window, her tall frame casting a shadow across the polished floor. Her scales caught the light from the distant stars, each one marked with the dark red patterns that signified her warrior status. She had killed her first enemy at age 12. She had led troops into battle by 16. Now, at 28 cycles, she was being sold like a piece of cargo to seal a peace treaty. She hated it. She hated everything about this situation. "The human delegation has arrived, Your Highness," her advisor Kethron announced, his own scales bearing the silver markings of a diplomat rather than a warrior. He had served her family for decades, and she could hear the sympathy in his voice. Zarathi turned from the window. "Let them enter." The doors slid open with a soft hiss. 3 humans walked in, and Zarathi felt her disappointment deepen. They were so small, so fragile looking. Their skin had no protective covering, no scales or armor plating. Just soft pink and brown flesh that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. How had these creatures ever survived long enough to reach the stars? The woman in front wore a dark blue uniform with gold trim. She had gray hair pulled back severely and carried herself with the rigid posture of a military officer. "Princess Zarathi, I am Admiral Helen Carter of Earth's Diplomatic Corps. On behalf of humanity, I thank you for agreeing to this union." Zarathi said nothing. She had not agreed to anything. Her father, the Supreme Commander, had ordered it. The war with humanity had dragged on for 3 years, costing both sides ships and soldiers. The Krell Empire had conquered 17 species across the galaxy. They had expected humanity to fall within months. Instead, the humans had fought them to a stalemate. Not through superior strength or warrior prowess, but through stubborn persistence and clever tactics that the Krell found dishonorable. When the peace talks began, humanity had proposed this marriage alliance, a symbolic union between the Krell princess and a human officer. Zarathi's father had accepted, seeing it as a way to end the costly war while appearing magnanimous. Zarathi saw it as a humiliation. "This is Captain Jake Morrison," Admiral Carter continued, gesturing to the man beside her. Zarathi looked at her future husband and felt her heart sink even further. He was unremarkable in every way. Average height for a human, which meant he barely reached her chest. Lean build without the bulk of a proper warrior. Short brown hair, brown eyes, a face that showed no obvious scars or marks of battle. He wore a simple gray uniform with minimal decorations. He looked more like a clerk than a soldier. Jake stepped forward and gave a slight bow. "Princess Zarathi, I am honored to meet you." His voice was quiet, calm, almost soft. Zarathi wanted to laugh. This was the great human warrior they sent. To marry her? This tiny, soft creature who spoke like he was addressing children? "You are the one they chose?" she asked, making no effort to hide her contempt. "I am," Jake replied simply. He met her eyes without flinching, which surprised her slightly. Most beings found Krell eyes unsettling with their vertical slits and golden color, but Jake simply looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Not fear, not aggression, just a strange calm. "Have you ever fought in battle?" she demanded. "I have served in the Colonial Defense Force for 12 years, Jake said. His tone remained even, neither proud nor defensive. "That means nothing. Have you killed an enemy in combat?" There was a pause, brief but noticeable. Something flickered across Jake's face, gone so quickly that Zarathi almost missed it. "Yes," he said quietly. "I have." Admiral Carter cleared her throat. "Captain Morrison has an exemplary service record. He has been selected for his diplomatic skills and his understanding of interspecies relations." Diplomatic skills. Of course, they had not sent her a warrior. They had sent her a talker, a politician in soldier's clothing. Zarathi felt the insult deeply. The Krell valued strength, courage, and martial prowess above all else. This human possessed none of these things, at least not that she could see. "When is the ceremony?" Zarathi asked coldly. "Tomorrow, if that is acceptable," Admiral Carter said. The sooner we formalize the union, the sooner both our governments can begin the full peace process. Fine. Tomorrow then. Zarathi turned back to the window, dismissing them. She heard the humans leave quietly, their soft footsteps barely audible. Kethron approached her side. Your Highness, perhaps you should give the human a chance. The reports say he is well respected among his people. Respected for what? Zarathi hissed. For talking? For smiling and bowing? I am a warrior of the Krell Empire. I have led soldiers into battle. I have felt blood on my claws. And they expect me to mate with that soft little creature? It is for peace, Your Highness. It is for humiliation, Zarathi corrected. But she said nothing more. She had her orders. The wedding ceremony took place in the main assembly hall of Meridian Point Station. Representatives from both governments attended, along with observers from neutral species curious to witness this historic moment. The room had been decorated to accommodate both Krell and human traditions, though Zarathi found the whole display distasteful. She wore her ceremonial armor, black and red, marked with the symbols of her house and her personal battle victories. Jake wore his formal military uniform, dark blue with silver buttons. He looked even smaller standing beside her on the raised platform. A neutral arbiter, an insectoid creature from the Harmony Collective, performed the ceremony. The words meant little to Zarathi. She spoke her vows in Krell, Jake spoke his in human standard, and the translation devices converted everything for the assembled crowd. When it came time for the traditional gesture of unity, Zarathi extended her clawed hand. Jake placed his much smaller hand in hers without hesitation. His skin was warm, she noticed. Soft, but not weak, with calluses on the palm that suggested he at least knew how to hold a weapon. His grip was firm but not challenging. She could crush his hand easily if she chose. The thought crossed her mind, and she wondered if he knew how vulnerable he was in that moment. But Jake simply looked up at her with those calm brown eyes and gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging her thoughts and accepting them. The ceremony concluded. They were married, bound by treaty and tradition until death or mutual agreement dissolved the union. The assembled crowd offered polite applause. Zarathi felt numb. They were assigned quarters on the diplomatic vessel, Horizon's Edge, a ship designed for long-term habitation by multiple species. Their rooms were spacious, divided into separate sleeping chambers connected by a common area. At least she would not have to share a bed with the human. That first night, Jake moved his belongings into his chamber quietly and efficiently. He did not try to make conversation. He did not attempt any of the human romantic gestures she had heard about. He simply organized his space, wished her a good night, and closed his door. Zarathi sat alone in the common area, staring at nothing. She had married a human for peace. A small, quiet, unremarkable human who would probably spend the next several years trying not to annoy her. Her father would expect her to produce offspring eventually, but the medical teams had not yet determined if Krell and human biology were even compatible in that way. Perhaps they would be spared that indignity at least. Through the thin door she could hear small sounds from Jake's chamber. Movement, water running, then silence. She wondered what the human was thinking. Was he disappointed too? Had he been ordered into this marriage against his will? Or did humans view such arrangements differently? It did not matter. They were bound now, two strangers from different worlds, forced together by governments desperate to end a war. Zarathi went to her own chamber and lay down on the sleeping platform. Tomorrow they would begin the long journey back to the core systems where they would live as symbols of peace. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about the next several years of her life chained to a creature she neither respected nor understood. She married a human for peace, but peace felt like prison. 3 months passed aboard Horizon's Edge, and Zarathi learned very little about her human husband. Jake Morrison kept to himself mostly, following a routine that seemed carved in stone. He woke early, earlier than she did despite Krell sleeping less than humans. She would emerge from her chamber to find him already finished with his morning meal, usually something simple that he prepared himself in their small galley. He exercised every day in their quarters, but not in ways that made sense to her. No heavy lifting, no combat drills, no displays of strength. Instead, he did strange movements with his body weight, holding positions that looked uncomfortable for long periods. Push-ups, he called them, planks. Pull-ups on a bar he had installed in his doorway. And running. He ran on the ship's exercise track for an hour each day, just running in circles, his face blank and focused. "Why do you run?" she asked him once, watching from the observation deck above the track. "You go nowhere." Jake looked up at her, not breaking his steady pace. "Humans are built for running." "It helps me think. Running is for chasing prey or fleeing enemies." "Sometimes," Jake agreed. "Sometimes it is just for running." She did not understand him. The Krell measured worth through combat, through displays of power and dominance. Jake showed none of these things. He spoke quietly, moved carefully, and seemed content to fade into the background during the diplomatic functions they were required to attend together. Other species barely noticed him standing beside her. Zarathi found it infuriating. She was married to a ghost of a man. She began testing him, as was the Krell way. If he would not prove himself through combat, she would force the issue. One evening in their common area, she commented on human weakness while reviewing tactical reports from the war. "Your people lost more ships than mine," she said, her tone casual but cutting. "Human vessels crumble under Krell weapons." Jake looked up from the book he was reading on his datapad. "We lost more ships," he agreed, "but we adapted our tactics. By the end, the kill ratio had evened out. Only because you hid behind defensive positions and refused honorable combat. We fought to win, not to satisfy honor codes," Jake said mildly. He returned to his reading. Zarathi felt her temper rise. He would not even argue with her properly. A true warrior faces his enemy directly. "A true warrior stays alive and completes his mission," Jake replied without looking up. "Dead warriors do not protect anything." She wanted to challenge him further, to make him angry, to see something other than that infuriating calm. But he simply continued reading as if she had said nothing important. Another time, she convinced him to come to the ship's gymnasium, a large space equipped for multiple species to train. Several Krell soldiers were there, part of the Treaty Observer Force. They eyed Jake with barely concealed contempt. "Show me human combat techniques," Zarathi demanded, loud enough for the others to hear. Jake shook his head. "I prefer my own training routine." "Are you afraid?" One of the Krell soldiers called out, a young warrior named Vectar. "The little human fears to face a real opponent?" Jake glanced at Vectar, then back to Zarathi. "I am not here to provide entertainment." "He is a coward," Vectar laughed, moving closer. "The princess was given a coward for a mate. How shameful." Zarathi watched Jake's face carefully. For just a moment, just the briefest instant, she saw something shift in his expression. His eyes changed, became hard and cold, and his posture altered in a subtle way that made him suddenly look more dangerous despite his smaller size. Then it passed and the calm mask returned. "Excuse me," Jake said quietly and walked out of the gymnasium. Vectar and the other soldiers laughed. Zarathi said nothing, but something about that brief moment bothered her. She had seen warriors before battle, had seen the way they prepared themselves mentally for violence. For just that instant, Jake had looked like a warrior preparing for a kill. Then it had vanished so completely she wondered if she imagined it. She began watching him more carefully after that. There were small things, details she had missed before. The way he always knew where everyone in a room was positioned. His eyes tracking movement even when he appeared to be focused elsewhere. How he never sat with his back to a door. The way his hands sometimes clenched when he thought no one was looking, then deliberately relaxed. Once she saw him in the galley very early in the morning. She had woken from a bad dream about the war and came out for water. Jake was there in loose sleeping clothes, and he did not notice her at first. He stood at the counter, gripping the edge with both hands, his knuckles white. His eyes were closed, and he was breathing in a careful, measured pattern. After a minute, he released the counter. There were finger impressions in the metal. Zarathi retreated to her chamber without making her presence known. She asked Kethron to research Captain Jake Morrison. Her advisor returned with information that told her very little. Military service for 12 years, as Jake had said. Multiple deployments to conflict zones. Decorated for valor on 3 occasions, though the citations were vague about details. Current assignment to the diplomatic corps. No family listed, no close personal relationships. It was a strange file, full of facts that revealed nothing important. There are classified sections, Kethron noted, portions of his service record that require special clearance to access. Can you get that clearance? Not without alerting both governments that we are investigating him. Is there a problem, Your Highness? Zarathi considered. No, she said finally. No problem, but there was something. She could feel it. At dinner one evening, a situation arose that brought things into sharper focus. They were dining in one of the station's public restaurants, a requirement for their diplomatic roles. Several species were present, including a group of Valasian traders at a nearby table. Valasians were large, aggressive beings who made their living through trade and intimidation. One of them, drunk on some form of intoxicant, approached their table. The Krell princess, he slurred, his breath reeking. Heard you married a human. Let me see this creature. Jake remained seated, his expression neutral. Zarathi felt her scales flush with anger. She began to rise, ready to put this fool in his place, but the Valasian continued. So small, so weak. Is this what the mighty Krell have fallen to? Mating with prey animals? The restaurant had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Zarathi's hand moved to the ceremonial blade she wore at her side. She would cut this fool down for his insult. Then Jake stood up. He did not move quickly or aggressively. He simply rose from his chair and stepped around the table to stand between Zarathi and the Valasian. He was smaller than both of them, and he made no threatening gestures. But something about the way he moved, the way he positioned himself, made everyone in the restaurant tense. You should return to your table, Jake said. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the silent room. The Valasian laughed. Or what, little human? You will bleed on me? Jake did not respond. He just looked at the Valasian and his eyes changed. That cold, hard look that Zarathi had seen before, but stronger now, more focused. It was the look of something ancient and dangerous. A predator evaluating prey and finding it easy to kill. The Valasian's laughter died. He took a step back. Return to your table, Jake repeated in that same quiet tone. Now. The Valasian turned and walked away quickly, his companions following. The restaurant slowly returned to normal conversation, though many eyes stayed on their table. Jake sat down and continued eating as if nothing had happened. Zarathi stared at him. What did you do? I asked him to leave, Jake said simply. You did more than that. He was afraid. I saw it. Jake took a drink of water. Some people understand certain kinds of communication better than others. What kind of communication? Jake looked at her then, and for a moment that cold look was back in his eyes. The kind that explains what will happen if they do not comply. Then he blinked and the calm mask returned. So smoothly it was like watching someone put on a different face. We should finish eating. We have the reception tomorrow evening. Zarathi ate the rest of her meal in silence, her mind racing. She had married a human for peace, that much was true. But what kind of human had she married? What was hiding behind that quiet, careful exterior? And why did humanity send this particular man to be her husband? That night she lay awake in her chamber, listening to the soft sounds from Jake's room. She heard him moving, heard water running, heard the creak of his exercise bar, always moving, always controlled, always measuring himself. She wondered what would happen if he stopped measuring. What would happen if whatever he kept locked away got loose? Part of her was curious. Part of her was beginning to realize she might be afraid of the answer. The attack came without warning on a normal Tuesday afternoon ship time. Horizon's Edge was passing through the disputed zone, a region of space claimed by neither Krell nor human governments. It was supposed to be safe, monitored by both sides as neutral territory. That assumption proved deadly wrong. Zarathi was in the gymnasium when the first explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered and emergency alarms began screaming. Her combat training took over immediately. She grabbed her weapons from her locker and ran toward the command deck, her clawed feet finding purchase even as the ship lurched sideways from another impact. The corridors were chaos. Crew members from various species scrambled to their emergency stations. Through the transparent sections of hull, Zarathi could see 3 smaller ships attacking, their weapons tearing into Horizon's Edge with precise strikes. The markings on those ships made her hearts go cold. Renegade Krell. Warriors who had rejected the peace treaty and considered her a traitor. She reached the command deck to find Captain Lee, the ship's human commander, coordinating defense. They breached the lower deck, he shouted over the noise. Boarding party, at least 20 hostiles. Security is engaging, but they are heavily armed. I will fight, Zarathi said immediately. Captain Lee nodded. Deck 7, Section C, our people are falling back. Princess, they are here for you. They called you a traitor before they started firing. Zarathi bared her teeth. Let them come! She ran through the corridors toward the fighting, collecting 3 security officers along the way. They reached Deck 7 to find it had become a war zone. Bodies lay scattered, both defenders and attackers. The renegade Krell were pushing forward in a disciplined formation, their weapons cutting down anyone who opposed them. Zarathi threw herself into combat without hesitation. This was what she was born for, what she had trained for since childhood. Her blade met theirs with a satisfying crash of metal on metal. She fought with skill and fury, her body moving through forms practiced 10,000 times. But there were too many. For every renegade she cut down, 2 more appeared. They were well equipped and clearly prepared for a prolonged fight. The security forces were being overwhelmed. Fall back to Section B, Zarathi ordered. Seal the bulkheads behind us. They retreated in fighting order, but the renegades pressed hard. One of the security officers went down with a blade through his chest. Another took a blast to the shoulder and collapsed. Zarathi and the remaining officer made it through the bulkhead door and slammed it shut, but she knew it would not hold long. The renegades had cutting equipment. They would be through in minutes. Where is Jake? She asked suddenly, realizing she had not seen her husband since the attack began. The captain sent someone to secure him in your quarters, the security officer said, breathing hard. He was a young Krell named Tekvan, barely passed his warrior trials. Standard protocol for civilians during combat, civilians. Yes, Jake would be classified as a civilian, not a warrior. He would be locked in their rooms, probably terrified, while she fought and died out here. For some reason, that thought made her angry. He should at least be here to see her die with honor. The bulkhead door began to glow red as cutting torches started working on it from the other side. Zarathi readied her weapon. When they came through, she would take as many as she could before they brought her down. Then she heard something strange. Sounds from further down the corridor, back toward the residential sections. Shouts in Krell, sounds of fighting but different from the organized assault she had just escaped. These sounds were chaotic, filled with surprise and fear. The cutting on the bulkhead stopped. She heard the renegades on the other side talking in confused tones. Then silence. What is happening? Tekvan whispered. The bulkhead door, heavily damaged but still sealed, suddenly lurched. Someone was opening it from the other side. Zarathi raised her blade, ready for the renegades to pour through. The door opened. Jake stood there. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. His gray uniform was torn and soaked dark blue with Krell blood. In his right hand he held a black combat knife, the blade wet and dripping. His left hand gripped a plasma pistol taken from one of the renegades. His face was spattered with blood and his eyes were different. Not the calm brown eyes she knew. These eyes were cold and empty and terrifying. Behind him in the corridor lay bodies. Renegade Krell warriors, every one of them down and not moving. Some had blast wounds. Most had knife wounds in very specific places that spoke of someone who knew exactly where to cut to kill, quickly and efficiently. Jake, Zarathi said, her voice strange even to her own ears. He looked at her, and for a moment she thought he did not recognize her. Then something shifted and a tiny bit of recognition came into those cold eyes. Are you hurt? His voice was flat, emotionless. No, I am fine. What did you do? They were coming for you. I stopped them. He said it simply, as if he had fixed a broken door rather than killed a dozen trained Krell warriors. How? Jake did not answer. He turned and moved back down the corridor with a speed and silence that seemed impossible for someone who had just been in combat. Zarathi followed, unable to stop herself. The scene in the corridor was carnage. Renegade warriors lay everywhere, and each one had been killed with brutal efficiency. No wasted movement, no excess damage. Clean kills, fast kills, the work of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. They found more fighting near the main junction. A group of security officers were pinned down by renegades firing from cover. Jake moved before Zarathi could stop him. He did not charge in like a Krell warrior. He moved along the wall using shadows and corners, getting close to the renegade position without being seen. When he struck, it was like watching death itself work. He shot 2 renegades from behind before they knew he was there. A third turned toward him and Jake closed the distance faster than should have been possible, the knife coming up under the warrior's jaw and into his brain. The fourth renegade managed to swing a blade at him. Jake caught the warrior's arm, broke it with a twist that made Zarathi wince even from a distance, and drove his knife into the Krell's throat. It was over in seconds. The security officers stared at Jake in shock. He stood among the bodies, breathing hard now, blood covering him. He turned back toward Zarathi and she saw something in his face that made her understand everything and nothing at the same time. This was not a civilian. This was not a diplomat. This was a killer, refined and perfected, human evolution shaped into its most dangerous form. The command deck, Jake said, his voice still flat. There is another group heading there. We need to move. He started running and Zarathi found herself following him, this stranger wearing her husband's face. They reached the command deck to find the last group of renegades trying to breach the reinforced door. There were 8 of them, all heavily armed. Jake did not slow down. He shot 3 before they registered his presence. Zarathi threw herself into the fight beside him, her blade finding flesh. But she was aware, in a way she had never been before, that Jake was the more dangerous one in this fight. He moved through the renegades like water flowing around rocks, always in motion, never where they expected, his knife finding gaps in armor and flesh with horrible precision. When it was over, when the last renegade fell, Jake stood in the middle of the carnage. The cold had left his eyes, replaced by something worse, a deep, terrible weariness that made him look older than his years. He dropped the knife. His hands were shaking. Jake, Zarathi said softly. He looked at her and she saw pain in his eyes now. I am sorry you had to see that. What are you? I am what Earth made me, he said quietly. What we needed to survive. Captain Lee opened the command deck door, staring at the scene. Captain Morrison, I do not understand. Your file said Diplomatic Corps. My file is incomplete, Jake said. He was still shaking, reaction setting in. Is the ship secure? Yes, Captain Lee said. Yes, the attack is over. They are retreating, Jake nodded. Then his legs gave out and he sat down hard on the deck, his back against the wall. The adrenaline was leaving him and Zarathi could see what it cost him to do what he had done. He looked sick, exhausted, and haunted. She knelt beside him, this small human who had just killed more warriors than most Krell managed in a lifetime. Why did they send you? She asked. Why you specifically? Jake looked at her with those tired eyes. Because Earth needed to protect the peace. And I am very good at protecting things. By killing, when necessary. He closed his eyes. I did not want you to see this side of me. I was trying to be what the treaty needed. A peaceful husband. A diplomatic presence. But they came for you and I could not let that happen. Zarathi sat back on her heels, her mind reeling. She had married a human for peace, yes. But Earth had sent her a weapon, wrapped in the skin of a diplomat. A weapon they could aim at anyone who threatened their alliance, and that weapon had just saved her life. They sat in their quarters late that night after the attack. The ship was secured, the renegade vessels had fled and medical teams were treating the wounded. Jake had showered, washing away the blood, and now wore clean clothes. But Zarathi could still see the weariness in his eyes, the weight of what he had done. She had questions. So many questions that she did not know where to begin. Tell me the truth, she said finally. All of it. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He sat in one of the chairs in their common area, his hands clasped together, staring at nothing. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. You asked me once if I had killed in combat. I said yes. That was not quite honest. I have killed many times in many places in ways that most people never think about. I am not a regular soldier, Zarathi. I was never part of the regular military. Then what are you? Special operations. Deep cover. The kind of soldier that governments do not talk about publicly. He looked up at her. When humanity reached the stars and found other species, we learned quickly that we were not the strongest or the fastest. We were weaker than Krell, smaller than Valasians, less armored than a dozen other races. But we had something else. What? We are persistence predators, Jake said. Do you know what that means? Zarathi shook her head. Millions of years ago on Earth, humans were not the dominant species. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor. We were prey to larger animals, but we survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more relentless than anything else. We learned to hunt by chasing animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. We could not run as fast, but we could run longer than anything else alive. We learned to make weapons, to work in groups, to turn our environment into a tool. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. We are not stronger than you, Zarathi. But we do not give up. We do not stop. We find a way or we make one. And when we have to fight, we fight without honor or rules or mercy. We fight to win and to survive because that is what we have always done. Zarathi felt something cold in her chest. The war? You fought without honor. We fought to survive, Jake corrected. The Krell expected us to meet you in direct combat, ship to ship, warrior to warrior. But we used ambush tactics, hit-and-run attacks, psychological warfare. We made you afraid of empty space because you never knew where we would strike next. We did not fight fair. We fought smart. That is cowardice and that is evolution. Jake turned back to her. Every species in the galaxy has its strength. Krell are warriors, proud and powerful, but humans are survivors. We survived ice ages, plagues, predators, and each other. We refined war into a science over thousands of years. We fought each other so much and so often that we learned every possible way to kill, every tactic, every strategy. And when we reached the stars, we brought all of that with us. He moved to a storage unit and opened it. Inside was a case Zarathi had never seen before. Jake opened it carefully. Inside were military decorations, weapons, and a patch showing a black knife on a dark background. Earth Special Operations Command, he said quietly. I served with them for 10 years before the diplomatic assignment. We did the missions that could not be acknowledged. The work that kept humanity safe but could not be discussed. You are an assassin, sometimes. I was also a scout, a saboteur, a trainer, and a protector. He closed the case. I have done things I am not proud of, Zarathi. I have killed people who probably did not deserve it, followed orders that haunted me afterward, made choices that cost lives. But I did them because they were necessary, because someone had to, and because I was good at it. Zarathi tried to process this. Why did Earth send you to marry me? Because the treaty needed protection, Jake said simply. Both governments knew that there would be elements on both sides who opposed peace. Renegades like the ones who attacked today. Hardliners who wanted the war to continue. Earth needed someone who could protect the treaty, protect you, and do it quietly without starting another war. So you were here as my bodyguard. I was here as your husband, Jake said firmly. The protection was secondary. Earth chose me because I could do both. I could be diplomatic when needed and lethal when necessary. I could adapt to living with you, learning about you, respecting your culture while keeping you safe. He sat down again, and she could see how tired he was. I did not want to be that person around you. I wanted to be normal, peaceful, the kind of husband this treaty deserved. I wanted to leave that other part of myself behind. But when they came for you today, I could not let you die, so I became what I was trained to be. Zarathi was silent for a long time. She thought about the past months, all the times she had mocked him, tested him, thought him weak. He had endured all of it without complaint, without showing what he really was. He had controlled himself, measured every action, kept the weapon sheathed even when she pushed him. Show me, she said. Jake looked up. Show you what? Your body. The scars. You said you have fought many times. I want to see. He hesitated, then stood and removed his shirt. Zarathi stood and moved closer, examining him in the light. His body was lean but muscular in a way that was different from Krell warriors. Where they built bulk and power, humans built efficiency. Every muscle served a purpose, nothing wasted. But it was the scars that told the story. Burn marks across his ribs, a long blade scar across his back, small round marks that she recognized as bullet wounds, primitive projectile weapons that humans still used, a jagged scar along his left shoulder. Each one a story, a moment where he almost died but survived. This one, she said, touching the burn scar. Plasma grenade. I got caught in the blast radius during an extraction mission, spent 3 weeks in medical. This one, the blade scar. Hand-to-hand combat with a Krell warrior during a covert operation. He was better than me, but I was lucky. She touched another and another. Each scar had a story. Each story involved violence, survival, and continuing to fight when most would have died. This small, quiet human had survived dozens of encounters that should have killed him. Why do you train so much? She asked. The running, the exercises. Discipline, Jake said. Control. Humans have aggression built into us, violence in our genes. If I do not control it, channel it, it controls me. The training helps. Meditation helps. Structure helps. I measure everything I do because if I do not, if I let go completely, I become something dangerous even to people I care about. Zarathi thought about that. The Krell celebrated violence, encouraged it, built their entire culture around it. But humans feared it in themselves, fought to control it, created elaborate systems to keep it in check. Maybe that was what made them more dangerous. They understood violence deeply because they had to master it just to be safe around each other. "The Valasian at the restaurant," she said. "You scared him without touching him. How?" Jake smiled, but it was not a happy expression. Humans are very good at reading body language. We evolved to understand subtle signals, tiny changes in posture or expression. And we are good at sending those signals too. I let him see just for a moment what I was capable of. His instincts told him to run, so he ran. You can control that? Turn it on and off? Most of the time. Sometimes if I am tired or stressed, the control slips. That is why I work so hard to maintain it. Zarathi moved back to her seat, her mind working through everything he had told her. You said humans refined war into science, that you fought each other for thousands of years. Yes. We had global wars, conflicts that killed millions. We developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. We came very close to making ourselves extinct several times. When we finally achieved peace on Earth, it was because we had scared ourselves so badly that we had no choice. We learned to turn our aggression outward, into exploration and progress. But the capacity for violence is still there. It will always be there. And Earth sent you to protect the peace. Yes, because I understand violence. I know how it starts, how it escalates, and how to stop it. Sometimes you stop it with diplomacy. Sometimes you stop it the way I stopped it today. He looked at her directly. I am not proud of being a killer, Zarathi, but I am good at it, and that skill has kept people alive. It kept you alive. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the stars. She had spent months thinking her husband was weak, that humanity was weak. But weakness was not the right word. Humans were controlled. They were dangerous creatures who had learned to chain their own nature because they understood what happened when they did not. Jake Morrison was not weak. He was a weapon with a conscience, a killer who chose peace not because he could not fight, but because he understood the cost of fighting too well. I judged you wrongly, she said quietly. You judged me the way any Krell would judge a human. We are small. We avoid direct confrontation. We do not display our strength. By your standards, we look weak. But you are not. No, Jake agreed. We are just careful. Careful creatures are often the most dangerous ones. Zarathi turned back to him. What happens now? Jake put his shirt back on slowly. Now we continue the mission. The treaty still needs protecting. I will file a report about today's attack. Earth will investigate how the renegades knew our route. Both governments will increase security, and we will keep being the symbol that the treaty needs. Word of the attack spread quickly through diplomatic channels. The renegade Krell had been captured or killed, but the incident raised serious questions about the security of the peace treaty. Some called for increased military presence. Others suggested the marriage alliance had failed and should be dissolved. The next 2 weeks were filled with tense meetings and heated debates. Zarathi stood before the Galactic Council, the assembled representatives of 30 species watching her from their seats in the Great Chamber on Meridian Point Station. Her father, Supreme Commander Krathfor, watched from the Krell delegation, his expression unreadable. Jake stood beside her, back in his diplomatic uniform, looking small and quiet as always. But Zarathi saw him differently now. She saw the careful positioning, the awareness in his eyes, the controlled power in his stance. Members of the council, she began, her voice carrying through the chamber. I asked to speak today because many of you have questions about the attack on Horizon's Edge. Many of you wonder if this marriage alliance has failed. If the peace treaty is doomed, she paused, letting her words settle. I stand before you to say that the alliance has not failed. It has been tested and proven strong. There were murmurs from the assembled delegates. Ambassador Chen from Earth, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward with interest. Zarathi's father remained still as stone. When I married Captain Jake Morrison, I thought Earth had sent me a weakling, a small, quiet creature without honor or strength. I thought my people had made a mistake trusting humans. She glanced at Jake, who watched her calmly. I was wrong. The Krell measure strength through combat, through displays of power. We value directness, honor in battle, and physical dominance. By our standards, humans appear weak. They are smaller than most species. They avoid direct confrontation. They speak softly and move carefully. Zarathi swept her gaze across the council. But I learned something during the attack. I learned that humans are not weak. They are controlled. She began to walk slowly in front of the council seats, Jake following at her side. Humans are not warriors in the way Krell understand warriors. They are survivors. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them in every possible way. And they survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more persistent than anything else on their planet. They did not become strong through scales or claws. They became strong through intelligence and determination. During the attack, renegade Krell warriors boarded our ship. Trained fighters, heavily armed, seeking to kill me as a traitor. Our security forces fought bravely but were being overwhelmed. I fought as well as any Krell warrior would. We were losing. She stopped and turned to face Jake. Then my husband entered the fight, the small quiet human who I had dismissed as weak. He killed 12 renegade warriors by himself, 12 trained Krell fighters, each larger and stronger than him, each armed and armored. He killed them with efficiency I have never seen before, using tactics and skills that spoke of years of combat experience. The council chamber was completely silent now. Even her father was leaning forward, paying close attention. I learned that Earth did not send me a random officer. They sent me one of their most dangerous soldiers, a man trained in special operations, in the kind of warfare that most species do not even think about. A man who knows 100 ways to kill but chooses not to use them unless he must. She looked at Jake with something that might have been pride. A man who controlled himself for months, enduring my contempt and mockery, because the peace treaty required a diplomatic presence, not a warrior. She turned back to the council. Humans fight without honor, some say. They use ambush, deception, tactics that we call cowardly, but I understand now. They do not fight without honor. They fight to win. They fight to survive. And they are very, very good at it. Earth could have sent conquerors to the stars. With their adaptability and their understanding of warfare, they could have tried to dominate every species they met. But they chose peace. They chose diplomacy, not because they are weak, but because they understand the cost of war better than most species. They have fought each other for thousands of years. They know what violence leads to. Zarathi walked back to the center of the chamber. The attack on Horizon's Edge did not prove the treaty is weak. It proved that the treaty is protected by something stronger than weapons or warships. It is protected by humans who choose peace while being fully capable of war. And it is protected by Krell who are learning that strength comes in forms we did not expect. She bowed her head slightly to the council. I married a human for peace. I thought it was a sacrifice, a humiliation. Now I understand it was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to build something stronger than either of our species could build alone. She stepped back. Jake moved forward, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. Princess Zarathi is correct. Earth sent me to protect this alliance because we believe in it. We believe that peace between Krell and humans can be a foundation for peace across the galaxy. But peace requires understanding. He looked at the assembled delegates. The Krell see humans as weak because we do not show our strength openly. Humans see Krell as brutal because your culture celebrates violence we try to control. Both perspectives are incomplete. The truth is that every species has strengths and weaknesses. Krell are powerful warriors with a strong sense of honor. Humans are adaptable survivors with a talent for strategy. Working together, learning from each other, we become stronger than either species alone. The renegades who attacked us rejected this understanding. They clung to old ways, old prejudices, but they failed. And they will continue to fail, because the future belongs to those who can adapt, who can learn, who can build bridges instead of walls. Jake looked at Zarathi. My wife taught me about Krell honor, about the value of direct action and courage. I am teaching her about human persistence and tactical thinking. We are becoming better by understanding each other. That is what this treaty should be about. Not just ending a war, but beginning something new. The council chamber remained quiet for a long moment after they finished speaking. Then Ambassador Chen from Earth stood and began to applaud. One by one, other delegates joined her, until the chamber filled with the sound of approval from 30 species. Zarathi's father remained seated, but when she looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that might have been approval, or at least recognition. The council voted to maintain the treaty and increase diplomatic exchanges between Krell and human populations. Security would be enhanced, but the marriage alliance would continue as the symbol of peace. That evening, back in their quarters on Horizon's Edge, Zarathi and Jake sat together in their common area. For the first time, the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. You spoke well today, Jake said. I spoke the truth, Zarathi replied. It was easier than I expected. Truth usually is once you stop avoiding it. She looked at him curiously. Will you really teach me human combat techniques? If you want to learn. But you have to understand it is not just about techniques. It is about mindset. Humans fight differently because we think differently. Then teach me to think like a human. Jake smiled. That might take a while. We are complicated creatures. Krell are not simple either. No, Jake agreed. I am learning that. Over the following months, they trained together. Jake taught Zarathi about human martial arts, not the flashy tournament fighting, but the practical, brutal combat techniques developed for survival. He taught her about persistence, about using an opponent's strength against them, about fighting smart instead of hard. Zarathi taught Jake about Krell warrior philosophy, about the honor in direct confrontation, about the spiritual aspects of combat that humans had mostly forgotten. She taught him about her culture's history, their values, their fears. They sparred in the gymnasium, attracting attention from others on the ship. People watched the Krell princess and the human captain working together, learning from each other, building something new from two very different traditions. Slowly, other Krell began asking about human combat techniques. Other humans began asking about Krell training methods. The exchange grew beyond just Zarathi and Jake. It became a symbol of what the peace treaty could mean. Zarathi's father visited the ship 6 months after the attack. He insisted on meeting privately with Jake, without Zarathi present. She worried about what might be said, but Jake accepted the meeting calmly. When he returned, she asked what happened. Your father wanted to know if I loved you, Jake said. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that when we married, I did not know you. I was following orders, but over these months, I have come to respect you deeply, to admire your strength and your willingness to learn, to care about your safety not because Earth ordered me to, but because you mattered to me. Zarathi felt something warm in her chest. That is close to love. It is the beginning of love, Jake agreed. I think we have time to see where it goes. My father accepted that. He said that respect is a good foundation, that Krell marriages often begin with respect and grow into deeper bonds. Jake smiled. He also said that if I hurt you, he will hunt me across the galaxy and tear me apart personally. Zarathi laughed, a deep rumbling sound. That sounds like